He disappeared without a trace, no note, no warning. For 27 years, he lived alone in the freezing forests of Maine, stealing food at night, vanishing before anyone ever saw him. Locals thought it was a ghost. Police thought it was impossible. But when he was finally caught, the truth shocked the entire world. This is the unbelievable story of the man who walked into the woods and stayed there for almost 3 decades. Christopher Thomas Knight was 20 years old in the spring of 1986. He wasn't a criminal, he wasn't in trouble, and he had no dramatic reason to run away. He had a family who loved him, a steady job installing home security systems, and a quiet life in the small towns of Maine. But inside, Christopher felt something that no one around him could understand. He didn't want to live in the world anymore. On a calm afternoon, he drove his car to the edge of the woods. He left the keys on the dashboard, locked the doors, and stepped out. No backpack full of supplies, no map, no compass, no plan. He walked into the trees and never came back. To his family, it looked like he had vanished. At first, there were questions. Had he been kidnapped? Did he have an accident? Was he hiding something? But days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and Christopher never returned. The car was found abandoned, but there was no sign of him. Police opened a missing person case, but without leads, the file went cold. Slowly, people stopped asking questions. But Christopher hadn't died. He hadn't run away to another city. He had chosen something unthinkable. He wanted to disappear from society completely. At first, life in the forest was brutally hard. Maine is known for its long, freezing winters and its mosquito-filled summers. Nights could drop below zero, and without fire, frostbite was always a threat. But Christopher had made a vow to himself: no fire, ever. Smoke meant discovery. A flicker of light meant risk. If he was going to vanish, he had to do it perfectly. He learned to move silently at night. He studied the landscape until he knew every rock, every hollow tree, every trail no one walked. For shelter, he used caves, overhangs, or patches of ground hidden under branches. He learned to sleep lightly, waking at the crunch of a twig or the snap of ice in a nearby pond. But survival required more than caution. It required food, and that was where Christopher began to build the legend that would follow him for decades. The first time he stole, it was out of desperation. A cabin near the lake sat dark and empty in early spring. He forced the door quietly and found canned food, matches, and clothing. He didn't take everything, only what he needed, and then he vanished back into the trees. From that moment, theft became his lifeline. He broke into camps, summer homes, and vacation cottages. He took peanut butter, bread, propane tanks, batteries, books, even a Game Boy once. Always small items, always carefully. He never broke windows, he never left destruction, he never took valuables like jewelry or cash. It was only about survival. Locals began to notice strange things. A cabin owner would open the fridge and find a few eggs missing, a pack of hot dogs gone, a flashlight with dead batteries replaced by new ones. Nothing violent, nothing dramatic, just little vanishings. At first, people blamed raccoons or kids playing pranks, but year after year, the pattern continued. And then the rumors started. There was someone out there in the woods, someone living like a ghost. Christopher was careful beyond belief. He never left footprints where snow could hold them. He stepped only on rocks or hard ground. He studied the sounds of the night, timing his movements with the wind so leaves would rustle and cover his noise. He built a hidden camp so well camouflaged that hikers could pass within 20 feet and never notice it. There, he stored propane tanks, food, books, and clothing. His camp became a secret home, invisible to the outside world. And through it all, he never spoke to another human being, not once. For years, his only connection to humanity was through the books he stole and the voices on radios he powered with stolen batteries. He read history, philosophy, and novels. He knew about events in the world, but he chose to stay apart from them, unseen and unheard. Back in town, the legend grew. Locals at North Pond whispered about the Hermit. Campers swapped stories about missing candy bars or mysteriously moved objects. Some believed it was kids sneaking around. Others believed in a phantom, a ghost that haunted the lake. The police heard the rumors, but had no proof. How could a man live in the forest for years, unseen, through brutal winters, without ever making a mistake? It sounded impossible. But Christopher Knight was proving that the impossible could be real. And by the time the 1990s rolled into the 2000s, the Hermit of North Pond had become something much more than a rumor. He was a legend. And yet, no one had seen his face, not even once. That is where part 2 begins.
Christopher Knight had made a decision that most people couldn't even imagine: to live, truly live, outside of society. Not for a weekend camping trip, not for a year of adventure. Forever. But disappearing wasn't enough. If he was going to survive for decades, he needed a place to exist, hidden from every hunter, hiker, and police officer who might wander too close. Deep in the forest near North Pond, after years of searching, Christopher found it. A patch of ground between giant boulders, shielded by thick trees, invisible from the air and nearly impossible to notice from the ground. Here he built what would become his invisible kingdom, the secret camp where he spent more than 2 decades. The camp wasn't impressive in the way of human architecture. There were no log cabins, no chimneys, no visible shelters. Instead, Christopher pieced together tarps, ropes, stolen tents, and old buckets. Everything was arranged in silence, covered with branches, painted to blend into the forest. He created a small clearing where he cooked with propane stoves he had stolen from camps. He collected hundreds of propane tanks over the years, lugging them through the forest one by one at night. There was a path to his sleeping area, but he never walked it twice the same way, so no trail would form. He would circle, step on rocks, brush away footprints. His entire life became a study in remaining unseen. Inside the camp, there were bookshelves made from stolen boards, piles of magazines, stacks of novels. He read endlessly: philosophy, adventure, crime novels, anything he could find. Books became his connection to the world he had rejected. Through them, he traveled while never leaving his hidden fortress. Food was his greatest challenge. Christopher wasn't a hunter. He didn't fish. He didn't set traps. He survived almost entirely by stealing. At night, he crept into cabins around North Pond. He moved like a shadow. He studied locks and knew which doors creaked. He learned which families visited their summer homes only once a year, and which camps stocked pantries full of food. He never took too much: a jar of peanut butter, a pack of hot dogs, a bag of chips, a carton of eggs. Enough to keep him alive, never enough to raise too much alarm. But he was careful to the point of obsession. He knew exactly how to relock a door so it looked untouched. He would clean up crumbs so no one could prove he had been there. Sometimes he even left things behind, replacing batteries in radios or stacking stolen books neatly. For the families who owned those cabins, it was terrifying. Imagine returning to your vacation home and realizing someone had been inside. The milk is gone, the chips are missing, and yet the door is still locked. The lock works, the windows are closed, but someone has been here, someone invisible. Year after year this happened. Hundreds of small thefts, so precise and careful that no one ever caught the culprit. Locals began to whisper about the North Pond Hermit. Parents warned their children not to wander too far from camp. Some imagined he was dangerous. Others thought he was supernatural, a ghost, a spirit of the forest, an urban legend come to life. And in a way, Christopher encouraged that fear. The more people thought of him as a phantom, the less likely they were to believe he was real. The mystery protected him better than any wall. Over time, the North Pond Hermit became an obsession for locals. People left out extra food, hoping to appease him. Others set traps or cameras, hoping to catch him. But he always stayed one step ahead. In 27 years, not once did anyone take a photograph of him. Not once did anyone clearly see his face. And yet, he was everywhere. His presence was in the missing candy bars, in the propane tanks that vanished, in the half-empty fridges. 1,000 tiny fingerprints without a fingerprint. For Christopher, the forest became more than a hiding place. It was his universe. He timed his movements by the phases of the moon, knowing when it was too bright to risk walking. He learned how to stand still for minutes, even hours, blending with trees until even deer ignored him. Every sound became language. The wind through pine needles told him when someone was near. The ripple of water against rocks told him how close he was to the shoreline. He lived in a symphony of natural cues that most people never notice. But beneath all the silence, there was an invisible war. On one side, a man determined to erase himself from society. On the other, a community that felt haunted, violated, stalked by someone they could never see. For years, the North Pond Hermit was untouchable. But as the legend grew stronger, the determination to catch him grew as well. And by the early 2000s, the police weren't just listening to rumors, they were hunting a ghost. That is where Part 3 begins.
By the early 2000s, the North Pond Hermit had become more than a story. He was a legend. Every missing jar of peanut butter, every empty propane tank, every quietly stolen loaf of bread added to the myth. Campers, hikers, and local residents whispered about him in cabins and diners, trying to piece together the puzzle of a man who could vanish into thin air. But legends can only protect you for so long. In 2013, after nearly 3 decades, the local authorities decided to take the whispers seriously. Game wardens installed a silent alarm system in a remote cabin near the lake, a cabin that had previously been visited by the hermit dozens of times. They didn't know exactly when he would appear, but patience, as always, would be key. On a cold night, the trap finally worked. Christopher Knight, meticulous and careful as always, approached the cabin. He quietly unlocked the door, carefully avoiding squeaky floorboards. He had no idea that the alarm would silently alert the authorities. Seconds later, the officers moved in. The man who had eluded capture for 27 years was finally caught. He didn't run, he didn't resist, he simply stood there, pale, wiry, calm. After decades of shadows and whispers, the hermit had been revealed. When police searched his hidden camp, they were astounded. Inside were hundreds of stolen items carefully organized. Propane tanks stacked neatly, food stored in containers, books sorted by genre, magazines stacked like bricks. There was not a single sign of violence, no vandalism, just evidence of an incredibly disciplined man who had mastered survival in complete isolation. Christopher admitted to over 1,000 burglaries over the years, but he had never harmed anyone. Every theft was for survival, and every stolen item was meticulously accounted for. He had created a world where he could exist unseen, where society could not touch him, and where he could read, sleep, and survive without ever speaking more than a single word to another human being. The media descended immediately. Newspapers and television networks and documentary filmmakers flooded Maine to hear the story of the man who had lived in the woods for nearly 3 decades. Interviews revealed a man who was terrified of human contact. He described the outside world as loud, overwhelming, and impossible to navigate. The idea of interacting with others was exhausting to him, almost unthinkable. When asked why he chose such a life, he said simply, "I didn't know how to live in the world." That was the truth. Not drama, not anger, not rebellion. Just a quiet, desperate need to exist apart from everyone else. Locals were stunned. Those who had laughed off the rumors now realized that the hermit had been real all along. Some felt fear, others fascination. One homeowner who had lost peanut butter and batteries for decades finally understood who had been behind the mysterious disappearances. He described Christopher not as a criminal, but as a ghostly presence, a man who had been untouchable for so long that it seemed impossible he could be human. Christopher Knight's capture marked the end of an era. His story became the subject of books, documentaries, and countless articles online. But even in the public eye, he remained an enigma. How could a person survive alone in the woods for so long without dying of exposure, hunger, or boredom? How could he move among humans without ever being seen? And yet, for all the fascination, Christopher did not relish fame. He wanted only solitude, a life without observation, without expectation. After serving his sentence for burglary, he retreated once more into privacy. The man who had vanished for 27 years returned briefly to society and then disappeared again, this time into a life of quiet anonymity. The legend of the North Pond Hermit remains a story of endurance, ingenuity, and the extremes of human isolation. A man who walked away from everything the world offered, who lived in complete secrecy, and who survived not by luck, but by discipline, patience, and an unyielding will to exist apart from everyone else. This is a story that makes us wonder, how far could a person go to escape the noise of the world? How long could you survive if you disappeared completely? And what does it say about the human spirit that one man could live 27 years as a ghost among us and remain invisible until the moment he chose to be revealed?
After Christopher Knight was finally caught, the world tried to make sense of the impossible. For nearly 3 decades, a man had vanished from society, living as a ghost in one of the most unforgiving forests in the United States. How had he survived the bitter winters, the relentless insects, the hunger, and the isolation? How had he outsmarted every human being who ever tried to find him? The answer was not in luck or superhuman ability. It was in discipline, observation, and an almost obsessive understanding of his environment. He had learned to move without leaving a trace, to take only what he needed, and to listen to every sound around him. He became a student of the forest, a student of silence. In interviews after his capture, Christopher revealed a truth that was as simple as it was shocking. He didn't disappear out of anger or fear. He disappeared because he didn't know how to live in the world. Society, with its constant noise, obligations, and expectations, overwhelmed him. To exist, he had to step entirely outside it. Some people called him selfish, others called him brave. Some marveled at his ingenuity, and others were horrified by his decades of theft. Yet almost everyone who heard his story felt a mixture of fear and fascination. The North Pond Hermit had achieved what no one believed was possible: to vanish completely, to live unseen, and to survive in solitude for 27 years. His story forced a reflection on human nature. How much of our lives are dictated by society? How much do we rely on others to survive? And how much can one person endure alone? Christopher Knight demonstrated the extremes of human adaptability, showing that the mind, body, and spirit can survive even when the rules of society are abandoned. After serving a sentence for his burglaries, Christopher chose privacy over fame. He avoided the media frenzy, retreating into a quiet life away from cameras, interviews, and curiosity seekers. But his story remained alive in books, documentaries, and countless online articles. The Hermit of North Pond had become more than a man. He became a symbol of the boundary between society and isolation, order and chaos, visibility and invisibility. The legend continues to provoke thought. Could anyone else do what he did? Could you? Could anyone truly survive in complete isolation, disconnected from family, friends, and the conveniences of modern life? And perhaps the most haunting question: why do we fear those who choose a life apart from our own? Christopher Knight's life as the Hermit offers no easy answers. It is a story of survival, of discipline, of ingenuity, and of human limits. It reminds us that some truths are stranger than fiction, and some stories are too unbelievable to imagine until they happen. In the end, the Hermit of North Pond did not just disappear from the world. He disappeared into legend. And even today, when the wind rustles through the pine needles near North Pond, some locals swear they feel the presence, a reminder of a man who walked away from everything, survived the impossible, and remained invisible until the moment he chose to be seen. The North Pond Hermit may have returned to a quiet life, but his story lives on, a haunting, fascinating testament to the extremes of human will, patience, and the desire to exist entirely on one's own terms.